Hi there guys, quick video for you today as I have been and am still recovering from a rather nasty bout of something which may well be the Rona. I'm not entirely sure. My missus thinks so, she's a nurse, I'm not going to question her. The thing I wanted to talk about today was the very recent announcement from AMG, Atomic Mass Games, that development of Star Wars X-Wing and Star Wars Armada was going to cease. Now, I have to say that I'm not particularly surprised by this. I think X-Wing has been ailing for some time, and Armada's just basically been sitting dead in space, derelict. I think it's had one expansion in the last year, maybe. It's pretty far gone, unfortunately, which is a shame because it's a good game. But the one I really want to focus here on is X-Wing, because if there's ever a case of taking defeat from the jaws of victory, it has got to be X-Wing 2nd edition. When X-Wing was at its height, I was working for Wayland Games / Warcradle Studios, and I can tell you that trying to source copies of the core starter set of X-Wing was nigh on impossible. And in fact, intermediaries were looked at rather than the standard suppliers of Fantasy Flight, as it was at the time, Fantasy Flight Games products. The hype and the engagement in Star Wars had probably never been higher. Bear in mind, this was probably around about the time that Lucas sold to Disney, I would say. Yeah, it was flying high. You got these little pre-painted miniatures which you could get for about 10 or so, a little bit more sometimes, with all the cards you needed to play. And I amassed a massive fleet in no time. Absolutely massive. Loads of models. I think a lot of people were exactly the same, and I had a lot of fun playing X-Wing. It was a game that scaled fairly well. Got a little bit silly once you started having massive fleets and introducing things like capital ships, and that's why Armada worked so much better. And the general consensus at the time that X-Wing was going to be a genuine competitor and contender to taking the crown from GW, being both orders of magnitude cheaper to play, but also a much better rule set, more engaging, more fun, more dynamic. The tournament scene was doing well. I even played in a tournament myself and got absolutely destroyed by TIE Fighter spam. And yeah, it was doing really well, X-Wing. It was smashing. It was absolutely leveling the competition until 2nd edition. Now, 2nd edition X-Wing may well be one of the most spectacular dropping of the balls that I have ever seen. I think, in all honesty, it pretty much killed the game overnight. Certainly I more or less dropped out at that stage. And I think the reason for that is pretty much the way that they released 2nd edition. The idea of making it into an app so that they could easily update the rules was laudable, as there had been as expansions had been released. A growing meta emerging that had lots of exploits as they kept coming up with new ideas and introducing new rules and factions, scum and villainy. There were certain ways that you could just game the game, which is the case of any competitive system, and an element of play to win as well, because some cards were locked behind certain expansions. So if people had bought that expansion, even if they weren't using those ships, they would have access to cards that would give them an edge. The problem with 2nd edition was when they launched it, it invalidated absolutely everybody's fleets, and the way that you would be able to continue playing would be by buying upgrade kits. These upgrade kits were set, so they had a certain amount of ships in them, and the idea was that basically what it would do is it would cover all of the faction. So you would get a certain amount of each thing. So you might get 2 X-Wing upgrades, an A-Wing upgrade, a B-Wing upgrade, and things like that. But the problem was, because people by that stage had bespoke fleets, you would have A, bits of the upgrade kit that you would just never use, and B, the other bits of the upgrade kit, you would need to get multiple copies in order to continue to use your fleets. Therefore, when the upgrade happened, I more or less made a decision at that point to no longer continue with X-Wing. The cost of upgrading my fleets, I think it worked out that I was going to have to spend around about £150 to continue playing X-Wing the way I had been playing. And bear in mind, I'm by no means a competitive player. I'm not that invested in that way in the game. I played casually with friends. We got a load of ships together, got some beers or whatever, and just, threw some dice. It was good fun. And that was gone because of the upgrade cost. It was even worse if you bought into the Force Awakens bits, the new Disney Star Wars, because they were a separate faction called the Resistance. So you had to buy another upgrade kit if you had any of the new Mark X-Wings. And the whole thing just became untenable. That was the death knell for X-Wing. I think since then the popularity has been dropping off, and this is not going to be helped with the way that the franchise has been treated since by Disney, where fan interest now is probably at an all-time low, I would say, where a lot of people are just not fussed about Star Wars, putting it bluntly. They've been black-pilled out of it, or whatever you want to call it. You can only get away with a company turning around to its franchise's fans and labelling them racist or bigots because they don't like something. Now, obviously, there are always going to be racists and bigots out there. That's always going to be the case. There's going to be people that are just upset because you've put somebody black or gay in something. It's going to happen. But you can't go around calling your fan base that when they have legitimate complaints about character development, story writing, production. These things, and of course canon, these things are legitimate complaints, and to just completely disregard them and tell people that you don't want them to watch and that you consider them to be the enemy, well, they're not going to consume your products anymore. And the problem is, what's going to happen is they're not going to make a song and dance about it like they used to in the old days, like when The Last Jedi came out. What they're going to do is they're just going to walk away quietly. And the way that you're going to see that is in reduced sales. Add to this the fact that all of the X-Wing stuff had nearly doubled in price. I remember looking at some of the expansions, and the cost was just absolutely ridiculous. And I don't blame people for walking away from X-Wing. On top of that, I understand that there were some competitive rules changes that made the game rather unfavourable. Fantasy Flight Games moved off to Atomic Mass Games a number of years ago. So, Fantasy Flight Games were no longer dealing with it. Fantasy Flight Games is basically a card company now and nothing more. And I think that X-Wing's demise has been inevitable. I really do. There's been very few announcements over it. There's been hardly any hype. And this has gone hand in hand with the decline of interest in Star Wars. I was absolutely not surprised in the slightest to see this news come from X-Wing. And it makes me wonder about the health of Atomic Mass Games' other games. Obviously, I know they've just released a second edition of Marvel Crisis Protocol. I had a fair chunk of the first one, not played a great deal of it, enjoyed what I did play, but, just got the heroes that I liked, and they're sitting there and they're ready to play at any point. I don't feel any need to go to second edition for that one. And Shatterpoint, which is again a very expensive game, especially when you compare it to something like Masters of the Universe Battleground, which I reviewed recently for the channel. That one absolutely staggered me with its cost. You can get 2 or 3 models with all the cards and everything you need for it for about £15. Compare that to Shatterpoint, which is asking for 40 odd pounds for a couple of models, maybe 2 or 3 models. And the difference is night and day. And with the lack of or the reducing interest in Star Wars as an IP and as a brand, pretty much only the legacy stuff sells. I don't think they've even bothered doing anything on the sequel trilogy for Shatterpoint because they know full well it's going to fall flat on its arse. So combined with Disney's handling of the Star Wars IP, the rising costs and the way that these games have been treated, I'm not surprised to see them fail. And indeed, I wonder how long Shatterpoint will keep going, because I've asked a few people and they say the interest has dropped off. I do think that maybe they would have been better focusing on the launch box with legacy characters, doing the OT. I think that might have sold really well. Like if you've done an Endor set or something like that, it might be accused of aping Legion a little bit too much. I think if you want to say, I know Disney desperately doesn't want to do it. If they do anything, they'll remake the original trilogy when Lucas dies in 10 years or so. But they desperately don't want to lean on Lucas's stuff. They want their own stuff to be profitable and popular. But given that Disney cannot manage, or Kathleen Kennedy cannot manage Star Wars for shit, I don't see that happening. I think the only worth in Star Wars is the original trilogy for the most part, although obviously the Clone Wars era has a lot of fans as well. It's only a matter of time before you basically get people to the point where that's poisoned as well. So yeah, I'm not surprised to see the news. Let me know what you think down below. I apologise for my voice on this one. I am meant to be catching up with Matt on Monday, so we'll have some stuff to go then. But that's just my thoughts on this bit of news. As I say, let me know what you think, and I'll be back with some other stuff soon. Cheers.